The first thing I'll be evaluating is a PowerPoint presentation that I used during the Odyssey to go over the background information of the Epic. Now, when I began reading the background material, I did not realize how unsuited my material would be for students who need assistance with different special needs in an online setting. Well, I guess I'll begin by focusing on some of the positives and some of the things that make my PowerPoint presentation accessible, because there will be a lot of negatives to focus on afterwards. To start, I do use PowerPoint, and I'm able to put it in outline format, which, according to the book and according to the online accessibility guidelines, uh, both feel that when it's written in outline format, students can follow along much easier, which will make it better for them. Now, one thing with my formatting that I would need to change, if you notice here on my first slide about mythology, I use a numbered system where down here I have just bullet points. So I would probably want to go back and make that consistent throughout, because I know that can be a little confusing, especially if there would be some sort of software to read these. Now, another thing that I actually did was to help out with options per perception. I really do that there is good contrast between my background and the text and images I provide. I keep it very simple, black and white. I'm going to get to some different sides. Is it black and white? Now the text is a little bit smaller in some of these, but the contrast is always there, so anyone who might have visual. There's very few colored pictures. Here are some, which I'll actually get into those a little bit later, the images I chose to use. But I think that's one area where it is accessible for students who might be visually impaired. Now, a few things going back to my listing that I did not give consideration in as far as online classroom, because I never really thought about it before, is my listing order as well as the numbering. So if you look at here, this part, going over the Epic characteristics of an Epic, I go 1 through 9, and then on the very next slide, 5, 6, 7, it's out of order. That could confuse a student who is not, who has some visual impairments and is listening to the PowerPoint presentation or using some sort of reading technology. Furthermore, as I skip down, because this is based on a note sheet that I hand out to students, it skips around as far as numbering. Now that's something I'm really going to have to consider as I transition and move some of this material onto an online classroom in an online format. And I realize it could be a logistical nightmare for a student trying to use some sort of software that would benefit them. Now I am skipping around here, but I do want to kind of highlight both the positives and negatives. So to kind of help out any student to kind of comprehend the material, I do include a link that describes the video it's going to be moving the students to. It's about the Trojan War, so I offer both a hyperlink and the link of the YouTube URL. And hopefully students will be able to use this. This video is actually an older version of the Odyssey. It shows the Trojan War. And my hope is something like this could help students as they're learning about this war. You can see kind of a visual representation of it. And there is narration over the war, so a student who was maybe visually impaired could still appreciate the content of the video, because the character Odysseus is actually narrating the film clip, which is kind of a benefit to that video and a benefit to this presentation. One of the few and far between aspects of the video, or I'm sorry, the presentation that I've made accessible to varying level of student. So I'm sorry if this presentation gets a little jumpy. I'm jumping around. But one thing that I never considered, that I read about both in the online accessibility article here about about images, clip arts, and shapes in our textbook by Rice, and in the UDL guidelines, was that all visual elements or pictures should be supplemented with alternative text. I had never known what alternative text was. None of my pictures in this presentation were, but I did take the time to learn, with actually a little bit of help from some of my classmates here in this course, how I can add alternative text. So I realized you need to click on the picture and double click, go to format picture here, and then down here I can actually add descriptions. So for the descriptions of each of these modern epics to kind of put the epic genre in context for the students in this presentation, I give the title of the movie poster and I give a brief description. So for example, here I go into several ways how Lord of the Rings is a modern epic. On the next slide, I go into some ways how Harry Potter is a modern epic and how Harry Potter fits the characteristics of an epic hero. And that was something I would never have considered to do, but it's something, as I'm looking back, it's actually a really great tool to use, because if I ever put this up on an online format and the students say misses a course that I'm teaching as to go back and review, they now have this alternative text to put context to the pictures. So as before, it was just a picture of, the Harry Potter movie poster or the Lord of the Rings movie poster, or if you're a Star Wars fan, the Star Wars movie poster. Now the students can see how that lines up with this idea of the epic and how those modern day examples fit with this genre that they will be studying in my course. And just to kind of wrap up this presentation I have, just to kind of be reflective on this one and maybe even a little hard on myself, I realized that as far as a PowerPoint presentation, it is very sloppy, and it really just kind of highlights consideration I never really have made, as I enter this course, as I'm thinking about how to put this material online, which is how often I will take a PowerPoint that may be thrown together by me, or something that isn't visually as good as it could be, isn't structured as good as it could be, and I use the traditional classroom environment to kind of hide some of those flaws. And this course has been great, so I can really take a look at some of the material I used and how can I make it more clear for every student, because I think making it accessible for students who may have a disability like hearing or a vision disability, that's just going to make some of these ideas more clear for every student, which is a goal I should have as a teacher. So that's something I kind of noticed, and I'm sure as I'm flipping through these slides again haphazardly, you may notice as well, as this is not a well put together presentation. But that's because I'm so used to the traditional classroom setting where with these notes, I'm giving it to the student to kind of for them to have it in the background, but I'm filling them in with conversation, with discussion, with backgrounds to this epic, the genre, and the Odyssey that I can do off the top of my head, which in an online environment I'm not going to be necessarily able to do. The second document I'll be reviewing for my online course is a worksheet I created for The Most Dangerous Game. That's a part of the short story unit. Students would have already read the story and completed this as an extension homework assignment so that they would have the ability to discuss the story and break down the story as they read. Now, just kind of give you a quick glance at what this looks like. It's a very short worksheet. So I have to be honest, reviewing this worksheet after I reviewed some of the documents for our course, it just further illustrated how ignorant I am of making an online document accessible for all types of learners. For example, I never understood or realized the benefit of using a heading, and after that great video that Ali put on our Module 6 overview, I was able to see how much of a difference it makes when you use a heading versus you don't use a heading, and how that could be so beneficial for a student who would have a visual impairment. And I realized that I did not do that. I was able to go back in and create headings. So this is heading number 1 for The Most Dangerous Game. So that would read differently than interpreting the story, which is the questions that the student has to answer. Furthermore, I realized, especially after looking at Rice, where she really breaks down the UDL, Universal Design for Learning, in 3 specific ways, I realized that this worksheet really does not provide multiple means of expressing understanding. And again, I'm stuck in my traditional classroom where if we're reviewing this homework, I know the students wrote it down because I checked before class, so I know they wrote down the homework. But I give them a chance to demonstrate their understanding by speaking to their classmates, by, even as something as simple as this plot map, we might draw the plot map out. And I realized that with just the worksheet, there's no place for the students to really be able to do that. And I'm just trying to put on my thinking cap here as I'm looking at this, and I'm going back into the text, on page 225. I really don't have an opportunity for students to like compose, illustrate, really show their understanding in a way that would be different than just writing it down. Now, I know I'm an English teacher and I really think writing is beneficial, but I also understand that without that secondary means of showing their demonstration, it it really will hinder some students from understanding the story. For example, we even look at this question right here. They read about suspense and foreshadowing in their textbook, and the major action of the story is foreshadowed by a conversation between Rainsford and Whitney, where they're talking about hunting jaguars. That's a perfect place where the technology could allow for them to bring in a link or to bring in a video about hunting, and make that connection to hunting, which is really relevant in the story of The Most Dangerous Game. But it's something that I would never consider because I'm so stuck on this paper, pencil classroom that I never really gave it a consideration. And, I'll show you here, this is a plot map they use for after the reading to kind of diagram everything. And going back to the idea of adding alternative text, come down here to the formatting picture. I never knew this existed, and it's just telling how beneficial this could be to any student, but especially a student who is visually impaired. They could actually have the chart explained to them. However, the idea of giving this to every student so that, if they couldn't remember what was going on with the plot map, I can put a description here. Same thing with the exposition. I can explain what I want them to put in the box because sometimes students don't always understand the things that they're missing. And, this is something my ignorance really disallowed for complete student understanding. And I'm starting to see the benefit of really learning this technology because I am one to figure out what's useful for me and not really explore it deeper. But understanding this shows me how I can add accessibility to the material I create, especially for an online learning environment. Just adding on that, I realized that this chart might be a nightmare for any sort of text reading software that a student would be employing if they're visually impaired. And it's something that I'll have to look into more to try to understand how I can reconfigure this graphic organizer, which is something, going back to the principles from from the Universal Design for Learning, the idea that I'm giving them a guide to highlight the critical features of the plot map. I have to make sure that it is as accessible as it could be in that Word document format, and I'm just not sure that's quite there yet. So that's another thing I really need to focus on as I'm, kind of evaluating the material, which is good because I think as a young teacher and as an ignorant teacher, as far as technology is concerned, I would have been prone to just throwing up this material that I found useful in a traditional classroom onto an online classroom and think, oh, well, that's going to work for every student. But, after reviewing my PowerPoint and after reviewing this worksheet, after reading all the material, I realized I'm going to need to make a lot of changes to a lot of the content that I offer students to make sure it's accessible and to make sure that they can use it to the best of their ability.